They knew before you did. Before you ever questioned why you felt different. Before you ever understood why rooms changed when you walked in. Why silence followed you like a shadow. And why eyes, so many eyes, watched you like they were reading scripture. You weren't just born, you were foretold. The 300-year-old prophecy didn't name you, but it described your eyes. Eyes that didn't just observe, but remembered. Carriers of ancestral truths. Record keepers of betrayal, resilience, and divine memory. The kind of gaze that unravels facades, undoes manipulation, and terrifies those who once fed off your silence. You see, chosen ones, your eyes were never simply for sight. They were instruments of awakening. Now we connect the truth that's long been buried. They owned everything about you, your thoughts, your voice, even your silence. Those weren't just metaphors. That was your real story, polished and paraded like a performance. You were the secret engine behind others' false glory. You were the sacrifice dressed in loyalty. They extracted your worth like oil, juiced your pain into content, and sold your still beating heart as inspiration, never asking if you were okay. But the game shifted when you remembered, when you finally held the journals, the hidden messages, the screenshots, the timelines, and the names. Not to seek revenge, but to set the record straight. Because the truth was never for them. It was for you. The prophecy didn't promise you comfort. It promised awakening. And that's exactly what's happening now. You are not simply the chosen one they feared. You are the remembering one they hoped would stay asleep. You are the author of the story they tried to control. Let them panic. Let the illusions shatter. You've got the receipts, the eyes that see, and finally, the key to your own freedom. The prophecy wasn't about saving the world. It was about saving yourself first. And you just did. 1. Instead of being empowered, the chosen one was chosen to be controlled. They picked you because you were malleable, flexible, and simple to shape. Not because you were unique. Being branded as the chosen one was not a boon. You served as their performance piece, walking legacy, and little project. There was a secret script, printed in tiny print, underneath every "We believe in you," as long as you stick to our plan. They chose you to obey, to reflect their wounds, to mend what they were unable to live the life they missed the deadline for, not to ascend. Their unfulfilled goals were projected onto your spotlight, which was never really yours. You received acclaim for your brilliance, but as soon as you stopped shining in the direction they indicated, you were penalized. As soon as you began to think independently, the chosen one abruptly turned into the problem one. It was emotional colonization and silent possession rather than empowerment. They were personalizing a commodity, not rearing a kid. All of the decisions were pre-approved. Every viewpoint was corrected, first softly, and then forcefully. The leash was long enough to give you the impression that you were free, but it was also tight enough to suffocate you the moment you deviated from the course they had laid out with quiet threats and demands. The twisted irony is this: the compliments they bestowed upon you, it was money, a reward for your obedience. The compliments were conditional. Performance was rewarded with affection. You were evaluated instead, then loved. The term chosen one was only a control tactic. And if you ever attempted to return the gift, may God help you. They picked you because they knew how to reroute your strength, not because they recognized it. They were uneasy about your potential, so they tamed it and gave it objectives and milestones they chose. They lamented the loss of their puppet rather than the loss of you when you eventually broke free. You were claimed. You were never chosen. You're reclaiming now. 2. Their manipulation was economic warfare rather than emotional manipulation. This was cold-blooded, strategic economic warfare disguised as bedtime tales and phony compassion. not some emotional blunder or careless parenting. They used you as leverage in addition to raising you. You were a walking investment portfolio and a valuable asset. Their only concern was the return. Your feelings were just a byproduct. You believed that because they cared, they pressured you into certain friendships, occupations, and schools. No, everything was done for strategic reasons. Controlling your production was the goal of every step. Everything had to appear nice on their scoreboard: the behavior, the grades, and the image. Furthermore, it was seen as a poor investment rather than agony if you began to glitch or if your mental health failed under the strain. They were managing assets, not raising children. What about your milestones? Those were dividends only. Commencement? They boasted to the family, great. Promotion at work? They told the tale again during dinner parties, which was perfect. You were suddenly ungrateful and too sensitive, however, when you broke down in private or questioned the arrangement, since defective items don't increase one's ego or resale worth. Your aspirations? Not required. What did they expect? Not negotiable. As long as you selected from the menu that they authorized, you were free to choose. And there's a business plan behind all the "we're so proud of you" moments. They groomed you to be useful, emotionally, monetarily, and socially, rather than cultivating you to be joyful. A little legible gold medal. They accomplished a lot, but the majority of it came with strings, bills, and interest rates. If you ever attempted to opt out or refuse the position, the guilt, manipulation, and screams of "after all we did for you" would follow. The bill always arrived later, and the affection was conditional. Therefore, it was emotional capitalism in full swing, rather than emotional parenting gone awry. You were brought up as animals, not with affection. The reason they're worried now that you've breached the fence isn't because they lost you, but rather because they lost the profit margin they established in your name. 3. Love was not a bond. It was a transaction. It was a loyalty scheme, not love. You gained points instead of affection. Can you make me smile? 10 points. Express what they want to hear. 20 more. Give up your limits in order to maintain harmony. Win big. However, their points and their warmth disappeared the instant you capitalized on your own identity. It was unconditional, they asserted. In other words, conditionally unconditional, as long as you continued to be dependable, controllable, and helpful. You were observed, not cared for. Depending on how successfully you performed your role, your worth fluctuated. Waves of affection arrived, but only if you waited. The love took a lunch break the instant you deviated from your usual behavior. They turned your longing for love into a weapon. The moment they gave you a crumb of praise, you would rush back because you were sufficiently starving. What's the worst? They gave you the impression that you were the thief, taking affection that you never really had. Type amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. They shifted the goalposts just when you thought you had it figured out. They set the emotional thermostat too cold. That's on you for being distant. Too warm? You're being clingy. Like a puppy that repeatedly hoped for a reward, but was reprimanded for barking. You were taught rather than loved. And if you did call it out, God forbid. They gaslight you into believing that love is meant to feel like pressure, performance, or punishment. So you keep going to auditions, pleading for a part in a screenplay you didn't create. All of a sudden you were too dramatic, too sensitive, and too ungrateful. They called it sacrifice, but in reality, they sacrificed your self-worth, stability, and honesty. They offered you the appearance of being selected, unique and treasured in return, until you realized the agreement concealed under the praise. This was emotional extortion disguised as a family portrait, not love. They're upset because the illusion can't continue without your help. Not because you've changed since you've stopped acting, and disconnected from the act. 4. The courtroom was an autopsy of a manufactured narrative, rather than a place where justice was served. It wasn't truth against falsehoods in the courtroom. It was truth that arrived injured and lies that wore suits. This wasn't justice. Rather, it was an autopsy of a plot that they had meticulously developed over many years and never anticipated being examined closely. Once it was, however, the tidy little story they gave about parenting, sacrifice, and "we did our best" fell apart like spoilt fruit. The court said that the whole performance was staged, not simply that you were incorrect. Every meticulously chosen story, every fabricated memory, and every time they sobbed in order to elicit sympathy, it was all taken apart piece by piece. Instead of just collapsing, the good parent stereotype was examined. Furthermore, they were losing their credibility as well as the script they operated under with each lie that was revealed. The emails conveyed a different narrative than the documentation did. The testimonials? They had no idea how many people would recall the flaws in their performance. But their testimonials were like landmines. And when the jury or judge saw the trend, it seemed more like a cold case that had been resurrected than a custody issue. To be honest, they were more afraid of the curtain being pulled back than they were of the legal loss. The whole puppeteering that went on behind the scenes was suddenly public knowledge. In front of strangers who owed them nothing, they affirmed things they had murmured in private and made you question yourself. They lost control rather than a case. They were no longer the proprietors of the story. You were a witness, a survivor, and a truth bomb that they were unable to defuse in time. You were no longer their persona. What's the worst? The court believed you, not merely agreed with you. It paid attention. It saw right through the phony tears and the guilt trips masquerading as worries. Their fear of being exposed was greater than their fear of the law. Because evidence is more frightening than punishment for those who thrive on falsehoods. Type Amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. 5. Family served as a human shield for them. Their Get Out of Accountability free card, all access pass, and force field was their family. They used the phrase, "but we're family," like a smoke bomb, whenever things became awkward, as if blood were a powerful enough bleach to undo the harm. However, it wasn't. It wasn't. To protect themselves, not you, they utilized family the way companies use tiny print. All the boundaries you attempted to establish, I tripped with guilt. Every effort to tell the truth, gaslit. Because you were tearing the family apart the minute you questioned their behavior, as if their abuse wasn't the catalyst. Simply put, they didn't want you to point out the debris. People nod when someone is described as poisonous, manipulative, and domineering. So society also goes along. Say it's your mother, your uncle, or your cousin, and all of a sudden they hold pearls and say, "But that's your family," as if DNA were some kind of miraculous moral sanitizer, or that being connected justifies smiling while swallowing poison. They were well aware of their actions. Being referred to as mom, dad, grandma, or big sis provided them with emotional shelter. Since nobody likes to be the one blaming their own blood, they knew you wouldn't dare speak out. They placed a wager on your quiet, and it was successful for a time. For the sake of peace, you swallowed pain. You remained silent while they rewrote history via family get-togethers. However, that cover broke the instant the reality became apparent. Because the truth is indifferent to your shared last name. Matching pajamas and Sunday meals are irrelevant to it. Patterns, repetition, and manipulation are important to it. Furthermore, the label of family didn't lessen the impact when individuals saw the pattern. On the contrary, it made it more repulsive. The reason they were acting undercover was not love, and their immunity was shattered along with that cover. No more pretending that abuse is honorable by hiding under the family badge. Family was never meant to imply don't speak. It was meant to mean don't hurt. They were utterly incompetent in that regard. 6. Silence was strategically enforced, not peaceful. You didn't develop by being silent. Maturity wasn't there. It wasn't acting morally. It was a matter of survival. It was awareness masquerading as a muzzle. Every time you attempted to tell your truth, they made you feel like the antagonist in your own tale. Not because you were mistaken, but because your truth damaged their reputation. This is why you were trained to choke on your truth. They just rewired your inner voice. They didn't have to physically quiet you. Your internal gatekeeper was guilt. You questioned every emotion, every statement, and every limit before they could ever be spoken. Not because they weren't real, but rather because you were taught to be afraid of the consequences of being honest. They persuaded you that speaking out would destroy the family, that showing your suffering was impolite, and that taking sides was treacherous. They created a system in which speaking the truth made them seem vulnerable, and being silent made you appear calm. And appearance was important in their world. Always put reputation before reality. As if it were a strange childhood recollection, you laughed off the horror, revised your tale, and chewed your tongue raw. Even though your insides were screaming, you maintained your calm like armor. What's the worst? You began to accept the myths that being the larger person meant being buried, that forgiving meant forgetting, and that being quiet made you stronger. Silence, however, isn't always honorable. Sometimes it's just trauma disguised as something else. Sometimes you are penalized for breaching a loyalty pledge that you never signed. They get alarmed the moment you choose to speak, to say, "Actually, that did hurt me." Not because you're lying, but because you're finally speaking the truth out. You were silent because they made sure you were afraid of the consequences of being honest, not because you had been cured. The stillness they formerly referred to as serenity is beginning to seem more like collaboration now that the muzzle is shattering. 7. You were prepared to feel appreciative of abuse. Present as a chance. They made you appreciate them for manipulating you, not simply for doing it. The true trick was that they took over, carefully adorned it, and smiled as if it were a gift as they gave it to you. You clung to it as if it were love, as though you were fortunate to have it, because you were too young to see the difference. Every time you questioned it, they used the trump card, "We sacrificed for you," as if their control was some noble act of service, as if they didn't gain anything from keeping you quiet, dependent, and moldable. You were taught to say thank you while crying. Thank you for the pressure. Thank you for the emotional blackmail. Thank you for the opportunities that came with strings tied so tightly they nearly cut off your sense of self. Although they referred to it as advising, it was really grooming. They weren't helping you. They were conditioning you to disregard your instincts, question your needs, and put up with suffering as long as it made them feel good. They wanted you to be polished rather than strong. It is little on the inside and shiny on the exterior. They were also calculated, reminding you of how much worse things might have been each time you broke beneath the weight. Not only did they mistreat you, but they also instilled a sense of appreciation. They convinced you that it was preferable to not being acknowledged at all, to be handled like a project with a goal. It's so complicated now because of this. They made their exploitation seem like effort, which is why the mending feels like a betrayal. To prevent you from ever wondering why they did things, or how much it cost you to embrace their kind of love, they used the fact that they did things for you as a weapon. You were conditioned to see your pain as a stepping stone, yet it was nothing more than a tether, a glittering ornamented leash. And they're freaking out because they can't manage their favorite puppet anymore. Not because they lost a kid, now that you're taking it away. 8. Your awakening was their greatest fear, not exposure. You getting on was their biggest fear, not the world catching on. Because they retain power, even when the truth is only spoken in whispers behind closed doors. Like a vinyl record playing repeatedly, they have the power to gaslight memories, rewrite history, and spin their version of events. However, the whole performance breaks down when you wake up. Notice the puppet strings and cut them one by one. Your perplexity, your skepticism, and your devotion to the story they propagated were the foundations of their dominion. They benefited greatly from your quiet, as it allowed the spectacle to continue without interruption. However, as soon as you draw back the curtain, the lights become harsh, and their flawless exterior shows every stain and fracture. The minute you start living outside their script, the moment you stop playing the part they created and begin writing your own, is what worries them, not the rumors or the drama in the courtroom. The power changes at that point, because control is about controlling you, not about retaining secrets or truths. You no longer dread them once you're awake. You no longer need their consent. You take back your narrative, your voice, and your decisions. And the ultimate rebellion is that. It's about being unshakable, not simply about being heard. They can attempt to gaslight you, embarrass you, or quiet you. But if you see through the smoke, none of it will work. Your awakening is the wind of truth that knocks down their power, which is like a house of cards.